In our headlines on this Thursday, April 17th, here in South Korea. The Bank of Korea decides to hold its benchmark lending rate steady at 2.75%, with policymakers opting for a wait-and-see approach to trade policy uncertainty. And over in the U.S., Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell acknowledges the likelihood of higher consumer prices and lower growth prospects in the face of rampant U.S. tariffs on its trade partners. Meanwhile, back on the local front, the government is reversing the medical school enrollment quota to its original size of 3,058 for next year, down from the expanded 5,058 this year that led to rampant protests by junior doctors. The Bank of Korea is holding its interest rate steady, opting for a wait-and-see approach amid trade policy uncertainty. Our correspondent Moon covers the central bank's latest decision.
South Korea's central bank has held its benchmark interest rate steady at 2.75% as widely expected. It announced the decision on Thursday following the third Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the year, taking a break after a quarter-point cut in February.
Considering the overall uncertain conditions, we decided to maintain our policy stance toward rate cuts, but judged that it would be appropriate to keep the base rate at its current level this time and observe further how domestic and external policy conditions evolve.
Unstable exchange rates for the Korean won against the greenback amid trade and political uncertainties had fueled expectations of a rate freeze. Earlier this month, the exchange rate between the won and the US dollar peaked at its highest in 16 years, before plummeting to its lowest for the year. Currently, the interest rate gap between the US and South Korea stands at 1.75 percentage points. A further widening of the gap could drive more capital outflows, placing additional downward pressure on the won. In its policy statement, the Bank of Korea highlighted increasing downside risks to growth, citing weak first-quarter economic performance and worsening global trade. While domestic inflation remained stable at 2.1% year-on-year in March, the BOK noted that weak internal demand and persistent export market uncertainty significantly pressured the outlook. It projected this year's economic growth rate to fall below its previous forecast of 1.5%, emphasizing the highly uncertain trajectory contingent on global trade negotiation outcomes. Going forward, experts say that while concerns over the Korean won remain, the central bank is likely to look at other factors for future monetary policy decisions.
Korea's exchange rate against the dollar is also affected by the dollar index, the Japanese yen, and the Chinese yuan. So rather than making decisions based solely on the exchange rate, the outlook is that the Bank of Korea will start focusing more on the domestic economy.
Looking ahead, the Bank of Korea said that it will continue to monitor changes in both domestic and global conditions, signaling that further rate cuts remain on the table, but with a cautious approach. Moon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., the Federal Reserve has acknowledged the likelihood of higher consumer prices and lower growth prospects in the face of rampant U.S. tariffs on its trade partners. Our Park Gun-woo reports.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has warned that the Trump administration's recent tariff policies could pose risks to the U.S. economy.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth.
Speaking at the Economic Club of Chicago on Wednesday, Powell said the tariffs are highly likely to cause at least a temporary rise in inflation, adding the impact could be more persistent. While the Fed aims to find a balance between keeping inflation at around 2% and maximizing employment, Powell said tariffs are leading the Fed to move away from those goals.
We will balance our maximum employment and price stability mandates, keeping in mind that without price stability, we cannot achieve the long periods of strong labor market conditions that benefit all Americans.
However, Powell also said the central bank will remain patient, holding off on any policy changes until it has a better understanding of how the current trade policies play out. Following Powell's remarks, U.S. stocks tumbled on Wednesday. The tech-heavy Nasdaq dropped more than 3%, while the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average also fell. Also on Wednesday, gold prices soared, once even hitting an all-time high of just over $3,357 per ounce. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Also in the U.S. this past Wednesday, Japanese trade delegates and their American counterparts met for talks on tariffs, during which President Donald Trump made a surprise appearance. Our Park Chun-an covers these talks.
The United States and Japan agreed to finalize a trade agreement as soon as possible during their Wednesday meeting in Washington. Japanese Economic Revitalization Minister Ryosei Akazawa said that while the U.S. was seeking to conclude the agreement within the 90-day suspension period for reciprocal tariffs, Tokyo was approaching the talks with caution, and the future course of the negotiations remained uncertain. During the talks, Akazawa expressed deep regret over President Donald Trump's tariff measures, noting that Washington had already imposed 25% tariffs on steel and automobiles, and is set to apply a 24% reciprocal tariff on Japanese goods.
For my part, I said that the United States tariff measures are deeply regrettable. I explained Japan's position regarding the impact on Japanese investment and hiring, both in Japan and in the United States, and strongly requested that the U.S. review its series of tariff measures.
After meeting the Japanese trade delegation, President Trump noted on his social media that it was a great honor and added big progress. According to Kyodo News, Washington is believed to have demanded higher defense spending by Tokyo, or a larger share of the costs associated with maintaining U.S. military forces in Japan as part of any tariff reduction agreement, even though the two parties did not reveal the specifics of their conversation. Akazawa explained that the two countries had agreed to reschedule the next round of talks to be held within April and to continue discussions at both the working and ministerial levels. Meanwhile, the U.S.-Japan talks were viewed as a reference point for South Korea ahead of Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok's visit to Washington next week. Park Chun-han, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics ranked #1 in smartphone shipments for the first quarter of this year. According to Counterpoint Research, Samsung's shipments amounted to 61 million units, surpassing Apple's by 3 million units. In terms of market share, Samsung also led with 20%, slightly ahead of Apple's 19%. Pundits are linking this performance to the Galaxy S25 series. The government is reversing its earlier expansion of medical school seats in a bid to resolve its protracted standoff with current students and junior doctors. Pyun Ye-young explains.
The government announced on Thursday that the 2026 medical school enrollment quota will be returned to the 2024 level of 3,058 students.
We will push for a legal amendment to allow universities to adjust their 2026 medical school enrollment quotas to the 2024 levels.
Last year, the government raised the quota by 2,000 to 5,058, but doctors and medical students strongly opposed the move, alleging it would hurt training conditions. This led to a wave of leaves of absence among medical students, resulting in a significant gap in their medical education. Presidents of 40 medical schools proposed that the government restore the original quota for 2026 admissions if all first-year students return to class. The government accepted the proposal on March 7th, but only if a sufficient number of students to ensure classes could proceed without disruption returned by the end of March. A surge in last-minute enrollments at the so-called Big Five medical schools led to that number being achieved. While many former students returned, a number opted to register but not attend. So even after reversing the quota increase, the government still has more to do to get these students back to classes and resolve the healthcare workforce shortage. This raises questions about the future of medical education.
We need to predict how the healthcare landscape will change 10 to 20 years from now. And based on that vision, we should determine how many medical professionals we need and what kind of education they should receive.
Universities are now required to submit revised admissions plans that reflect the updated quota to the Korean Council for University Education by the end of this month. The proposed changes will then be reviewed and finalized following KCUE approval, expected around May. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
In other news, presidential hopefuls of the Democratic Party have proposed relocating the top office to Sejong City as they begin their partisan campaign, while the candidates of the People Power Party prepare to hold a series of debates this weekend on issues of national interest. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has the latest.
Preliminary presidential candidates from the Democratic Party of Korea unveiled their strategies to boost growth in the Chungcheongdo provinces on Thursday, coinciding with the start of online voting by DP electors the day before. All three candidates shared a common pledge to fully establish Sejong City, located within Chungcheongdo, as South Korea's administrative capital, proposing to relocate the presidential office there. This pledge also follows a move by impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol, who previously relocated the presidential office from the Blue House to Yongsan, a decision heavily criticized by the DP as an unnecessary budget expenditure and notably the site of his martial law declaration. Chungcheongdo remains a crucial battleground for presidential candidates. Notably, the winner of this region has also secured victory in the last 7 presidential elections. Meanwhile, the People Power Party held a media day for its primary contestants on Thursday. With 8 contestants, they broke the first round debates into 2 groups by topic: Future for the Young Generations and Social Unity. The Future for the Young Generations debate will be held by Yoo Jung-bok, An Chol-soo, Kim Moon-soo, and Yang Yang-ja on Saturday. Social Unity by Lee Cheol-woo, Na Kyung-won, Han Dong-hun, and Hong Jun-pyo on Sunday. The People Power Party also launched its preparatory committee for the presidential election. Chaired by lawmaker Yoon Jae-ok, the committee is set to prepare for the PPP presidential election campaign once the party's candidate is chosen. Yoon said it's long overdue as the prep should have started before, but said the tortoise beat the hare. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Organizers of the 2025 APEC summit to be held in Korea's ancient southern city of Gyeongju this coming November are now looking to move from the planning phase to the execution stage. Speaking at a related meeting earlier on this Thursday, acting President Han Duck-soo also highlighted the significance of this latest annual summit as it comes amid much uncertainty over global trade, given the changes it currently faces. He further pointed to prospects of new investment here in South Korea as corporate leaders from around the world look to attend the gathering as well. South Korea and the U.S. earlier on this Thursday began their 2-week combined air drill. According to the Air Force here, some 1,100 personnel and 90 aircraft from both countries have been mobilized for the semi-annual Freedom Flag. Missions include air interdiction and counter-air operations, as well as wartime defense rehearsal. Freedom Flag combines 2 existing exercises, the annual Combined Air Force Composite Training and the Vigilant Defense. Korea's official development assistance has hit a record high. New OECD figures show Korea provided $3.94 billion in ODA last year, up almost 25% on year. The ratio of its contribution as compared to its gross national income also rose to an all-time high of 0.2%, the highest since Korea became a donor country in the year 2010. Seoul boosted its aid in key areas such as humanitarian relief, clean water and sanitation, as well as transport and infrastructure. Now, this assistance from South Korea comes at a time when most advanced economies are cutting back. ODA from countries like Germany, Japan and the UK saw notable declines, bringing the total aid from 32 donor nations down by over 5%. A notable demographic reality is taking shape with regard to the age and gender of North Korean defectors arriving here in South Korea in recent times. According to the Unification Ministry on this Thursday, most of the new arrivals are women in their 20s and 30s who spent a few years in third countries before seeking to settle here in South Korea. Between January and March this year, 38 North Korean defectors entered South Korea, slightly down from 43 during the same period last year, and only 1 was male. Most were younger women who had spent more than 5 years in third countries after fleeing North Korea before its COVID-19 border closure. At present, over 34,000 North Korean defectors reside here in South Korea. Now, at the National Assembly, lawmakers took part in a series of votes on a number of contentious issues this afternoon. I have our correspondent Shin Ha-young with details standing by, of course. Ha-young, welcome. So, Ha-young, what have you been hearing?
Sunny, just a few minutes ago, the National Assembly voted down a Democratic Party-led bill calling for a special investigation into former President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law last December and the related insurrection charges. In an anonymous vote of the total 299 votes cast, 197 voted for the bill and 102 voted against. The bill was vetoed in January by then-acting President Choi Sang-mok and sent back to the parliament for a revote. And for a bill already vetoed to pass, it requires approval from 2/3 or more of the lawmakers present, in addition to a majority attendance. And also, during Thursday's plenary session, the Assembly also voted down a bill that had been sent back for a revote, which called for a special prop into a political broker called Yoon. The DP in February unilaterally passed a bill seeking to investigate allegations of election fraud involving former President Yoon, First Lady Kim Gon-hee, and Myung. And ahead of the session, the rival parties issued sharp messages over the bills up for a revote. Take a listen.
It's time for the PPP to break ties with Yoon Suk-yeol, who was removed from office. If they oppose the special investigation again, it will clearly show they're siding with insurrection and acting against the Constitution.
These are populist and unjust bills that the DP pushed through without sufficient public consensus or regard for national interests and people's livelihoods, just to strengthen its political position.
Right, very different viewpoints there. Ha-young, do tell us a bit about the revote on the Commercial Act revision.
Sure, Sunny. Well, the Parliament also rejected a Commercial Act amendment, which was vetoed by acting President Han Duck-soo earlier this month. And the bill sought to revise the Commercial Act to add the word shareholders to the director's duties from just company in efforts to tackle the so-called Korea discount. And the PPP has been against the bill, arguing that it could lead to lawsuits and make it difficult for companies to make decisions. And it also claims that small investors are not contractually bound to the companies, with different types of investors aiming for different results. And that's all I have for this hour. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Ha-young, thank you for that coverage. That was our political correspondent Shin Ha-young with the latest at the Parliament. Moving forward, an intriguing collection of relics belonging to Korea's independence activists will go on auction this spring at an auction house here in capital Seoul. Our Yoon has a glimpse.
Revered Korean independence activist of the Japanese colonial era, An Jung-gun. As a part of his previously unreleased collection of calligraphic work left behind in the final days leading up to his execution, this piece, titled Nokjuk, or Green Bamboo, is presumed to have been created in February of 1910. This piece is different from his usual vertical writing, while his signature handprint is also imprinted horizontally. Han Yong-un was a Buddhist reformer, poet, and independence activist, also known by his pen name Manhae. This folding screen contains poetry of his that compares the path of Buddhist practice to the journey of a young monk to find his lost cow. It is a rare 10-panel masterpiece showcasing Manhae's unique round handwriting.
Manhae believed in the people continuing towards the independence of our country during the Japanese occupation. And through this poem, he wanted to remind us that it is a destination that should not be forgotten.
Seoul Auction's spring session will have a large number of such relics containing traces from the independence movement. In addition to the works of An Jung-gun and Han Yong-un, there will be the first edition of Yoon Dong-ju's book of poems titled Sky, Wind, Star, and Poem, showing the passage of time in its worn-out cover page, as well as documents like records of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. These items can range in value from tens to hundreds of thousands of US dollars. Garnering great interest due to this year marking the 80th anniversary of Korean independence, the relics will be shown in a free exhibition until April 21st, a day before the auction on the 22nd. 이은진, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the UK, the Supreme Court has made a landmark decision regarding the legal definition of a woman. According to the ruling, under the Equality Act 2010, woman refers exclusively to biological sex, excluding transgender people. The unanimous ruling on Wednesday local time stems from a legal challenge by the feminist advocacy group For Women Scotland against the Scottish Government's inclusion of transgender women in a 2018 law that mandated 50% female representation on public boards. The court ruled that the definition of woman should only include biological females. It said that interpreting the definition to include individuals based on gender identity would make the Equality Act inconsistent. However, the decision does not revoke existing protections against discrimination for transgender individuals. Women's rights groups lauded the ruling as a reaffirmation of sex-based rights, while LGBTQ+ organizations expressed concern and disappointment. The French government has announced the expulsion of 12 Algerian diplomatic staff following Algeria's decision to expel 12 French diplomats. This comes after France arrested an Algerian consular official suspected of links to a kidnapping. On Wednesday local time, France's foreign affairs minister said France will expel 12 Algerian diplomatic and consular officials in France and recalled its ambassador from Algiers for consultations. This move comes after Algeria decided to expel 12 French diplomats after France detained an Algerian consular agent linked to a kidnapping case. In 2024, an activist and influencer known as Amir DZ, a critic of the Algerian government, was abducted near Paris and released the following day. French prosecutors have charged 3 Algerian nationals, including the consular official, with kidnapping and terrorist conspiracy. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday met with 3 former hostages held by Hamas, who were released in late 2023 and February of this year. Speaking to Alexander Trufanov, who had been held by Hamas in Gaza for 498 days, Putin pledged to continue efforts to secure the release of remaining hostages. Putin also acknowledged years of stable relations with Palestinian representatives as pivotal in facilitating the release of the hostages and extended gratitude to Hamas for what he termed a humanitarian act. Trufanov, whose father was killed during the October 2023 Hamas attack, appealed to Putin to persist in efforts to free others still in captivity. Finally, astronomers have identified a new planet located approximately 120 light-years from Earth that resembles Tatooine, the home planet of Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars movie. The planet appears to orbit a pair of brown dwarfs, or what experts call failed stars, that are too small to shine like the sun. What makes this planet special is that it moves in a completely different direction from how the 2 stars orbit each other, referred to as a polar orbit. Although the planet was not directly seen, scientists spotted its presence by watching the movement of the stars. The author of the study, an astronomer from the University of Birmingham, said there aren't many very young planetary systems like this. This research was published in the journal Science Advances on April 16th. 최지희, Arirang News.
Today felt so hot during the day across the country. Inland areas, red on the map, exceeded 25 degrees Celsius, with the temperature in Seoul reaching 24 degrees, 27 degrees in Kimcheon, as hot as early summer already. As the daytime temperature rises significantly, the daily temperature difference widens as well. Please take care of your health. Even though the weather is getting warmer, the wind is blowing hard every day. Western winds of around 15 meters per second across the country today, and gusty winds of around 20 meters per second in the mountainous areas of Jeju Island until dawn tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, Seoul and Chuncheon will start off at 13 degrees, Jeju at 18 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 21 degrees in Seoul, 29 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. Another round of rain is expected across the country this weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Thank you for watching.